Nice to see so many of you on this beautiful evening. My name is Mitchell Stevens. I'm a faculty member in the Graduate School of Education, and with Roy P. and Candace Till, I'm co-convener of the project called Education's Digital Future, edf.stanford.edu. It's with some ambivalence that I convene this session because it's the last formal event of the enterprise called Education's Digital Future. It's by no means the end of Education's Digital Future. John Mitchell just quipped with me, the Vice Provost for Online Learning, quipped with me, he's like, this thing, people talking about digital learning, it's kind of like people talking about climate change. You know, is it happening? Is it not happening? Is it a good thing? How fast is it going? Right? But it is happening. So this is the conclusion of a program of events, but certainly not of the subject of that program of events. But the program has been very, very satisfying for me personally, and the enterprise did exactly what its co-conveners wanted it to do, which was to aggregate the great intellectual capacity of this school and this university and this region and expertise across the country to think in the broadest possible ways about how the digital future of education should be imagined, both at this university and beyond it. And we were very successful with that. I think the main reason we were successful in that, other than the fact that we started on time and ended on time, was that there, over the last 2 years, there has been so much interest in this domain, and that interest hasn't had nearly as many places to go as it should. And we gave many people, including ourselves, venues for talking in hopefully a low risk way about what kinds of questions we should be asking of education at this, what many are arguing as a pivotal moment in the history of the relationship between schooling, public and private capital, government, and digital technology. So I'm disappointed that the project is concluding, but I'm sort of thrilled that we have accomplished what we wanted to accomplish, which is sort of aggregating an intellectual community. And probably one of the things I'm most proud of is the collaboration that we've been able to have this year with the workshop on education, poverty, and inequality, which has some of the sort of strongest intellectual capital of the faculty and students here in the GSE. So I guess we're going to be here for a while in terms of building scholarship in this domain. And we have had participating in the enterprise students and faculty and staff from all 7 schools of the university, from the private sector throughout Silicon Valley, from our colleagues and institutions throughout the San Francisco Bay Area, and hundreds of visitors from across the country and nationwide. And in fact, we have a nice cosmopolitan group here once again this evening. And the topic of Candace and I talked very carefully about sort of how to, what to do with this extraordinary piece of attention that we have this evening. And we decided to focus on some of the largest questions that have been animating our conversation for the last 2 years. Whose digital future is it? And whose digital future is it from the standpoint of a user? Because no technology is ever designed for a neutral user, right? There is no Archimedean user around which technology is built. Technology is always designed with a particular kind of user in mind. So what kind of user or users ought the digital future be built to accommodate? Who will build that digital future, right? Who will the agents of that engineering be? I dare say who will pay for that digital future? And as we build this enterprise, what kinds of subjects do we want this education to produce? So we're certainly not going to answer all of those questions this evening. We will reiterate, I think, their importance and salience for conversations going forward. And we've assembled a terrific trio of colleagues to help us do that. And Candace Till is going to introduce them.
It is my pleasure to introduce our panel, all of whom I know. But I did ask them a couple things that I learned when I was putting together their little bios. So first we have Judy Miner, who's been 35 years an administrator in the California Community College system. First, Dean of Admissions and Records at San Francisco City College, and then assistant to the Vice Chancellor for Student Services at the system level, and then Vice President of Instruction at De Anza College, and then as she said the best to last, and is now President of Foothill College. I actually met Judy when we both served on the working group for the President's Council of Advisors for Science and Technology. The working group produced the Engage to Excel report. Our second speaker is Karen Cator, who was 17 years teaching in public education in Alaska, and then 12 years in corporate America at Apple, and then 3 years in government, which is where I met her, as director of the Office of Educational Technology in the Department of Education. And now 9 months, almost ready to birth it, as in the nonprofit sector as CEO of Digital Promise. And I met Karen when she was chair of the working group in the Department of Education, and our working group wrote the National Education Technology Plan. And finally, we have Eduardo Ochoa, who has been 30 years in the California state system, and first as professor of economics at Cal State Los Angeles, and then dean of business at Cal State Pomona, and then provost at Sonoma State University. And then he also took a little sidestep into the federal government. He was 2 years as the assistant secretary for post-secondary education, which is where I met him for the Obama administration. And now, best to last also, president of CSU Monterey Bay. So he has an interesting educational background too, in that his bachelor's degree, or his undergraduate degree, was in physics and philosophy, and then his master's degree is in nuclear engineering, and then his Ph.D. is in political economy. So, so he can speak across multiple levels of this question, whose digital future. So with that, please help me in welcoming. Oh, Karen's going to go first?
Yep.
Thought we were going in a different order. Karen Cator.
No problem. We switched it up on you, and I think I've been working on digital education, digital future, digital learning for my entire career, and I think it's the first time it's been compared to global climate change. So there you go. So Digital Promise is actually a congressionally authorized nonprofit organization that was put in place to spur innovation to improve the opportunity to learn for all Americans. So it's kind of where I am now is at this nonprofit, very interesting space. So we do think that there is just a lot of momentum happening right now. And so kind of to start this off, we thought we'd start kind of thinking about the assets. What do we have in place right now? What is, where are we with this kind of digital education, digital future? So we have people, we have amazing faculty, teachers, people who are engaging students with entirely new kinds of assignments, with arts, with photography, with design, all sorts of things, critical thinking, leveraging the internet with all different kinds of ways that people can publish, get feedback, and engage constituents. Lots of things happening with people there. Also, we have people of all ages now engaging in design thinking, in robotics, in coding, all the kinds of things we see kind of cropping up at schools across the country. So we have that happening as well. And we have young children. If any of you have little preschoolers, they're probably like in their car seat with the phones and iPads and whatever else. But they're exploring language, exploring stories, listening, watching, interacting in amazing ways. We don't know hardly anything about how this is going to affect their abilities around literacy and numeracy. We really don't know very much at all, but it's a pretty interesting space to watch. So those are some of the assets. We also, if we think about how technology affects lifelong learners, I have reporters saying, well, I don't know, does this stuff work? And Answer is, I don't know. Does your school work? Does your library work? We don't, it kind of depends what you're talking about. But let's just start with professional tools. If people have, the devices in their hands and they have access to professional tools, whether it be tools of animation or tools for word processing or publishing or filmmaking, whatever they are, professional tools, the tools that pros use in the hands of young people all the way up through college and career. Access to explanations. People ask me, Saul Khan Academy, is that going to replace schools? And it's like, no, because he's the explainer, not the teacher, right? He's not interacting with all of his students, listening to how they think mathematically, but he is a great explainer and he's explaining stuff, right? Animations, simulations, visualizations of complex concepts and data. These are assets that we have that we did not have previous to this digital life. Accessibility is probably one of the most interesting things, and I think we'll end up talking about this more later on tonight. But when we think about the accessibility technologies that make it possible for parents to communicate with a 15-year-old child on the with autism for the first time in their lives because of some of these interfaces that are now being put in place, the kinds of things that allow people who are blind to fully access everything on a screen, the kinds of technologies that allow the person sitting in the front seat of the taxi I was in the other day have a full-on sign language conversation with the person on the other side of the phone because they could use video. These accessibility technologies are powering up the opportunity to learn. Feedback loops, adaptive environments. I won't say more about that here in this particular audience. You guys know lots about that. Access to primary source documents, the kinds of things you would not have had otherwise. Books in the public domain. Access to experts and expertise, whether you want to fix your faucet, learn how to knit, play the guitar, learn about the Pythagorean theorem, whatever it is, you have access to experts and the expertise needed to help you with whatever it is you need to learn. And the ability to participate globally across borders, connect with people that you would not have otherwise had that opportunity to connect with. So these are some of the things that we now have access to because of the distribution power of the internet and these amazing kind of digital tools. So to start this conversation, we wanted to sort of start with the assets. What are we actually thinking about? So I think we do want to be clear that the problem with education today is not a lack of excellence, and it's not a lack of these digital tools and environments that are springing up, but it is definitely a lack of equity. It's not evenly distributed. Many people don't have access. They don't know what to do if they do have access. They don't have a voice. They're not participating. So when we talk about this digital future and whose future is it, we need to really think deeply about this. So when we think about the digital divide, we'd say that it's fueled by this notion of a digital learning gap. It is kind of three different things. So first, it is a lack of access. People who might not have the wherewithal and they don't have access, they don't know where to get access, they don't have broadband, they don't have a device. There are definitely still people who don't have a device, contrary to our kind of popular culture that says everybody's got a smartphone. But the second is a lack of participation, and we estimate about 100 million Americans, that's almost a third of Americans, are not currently participating, are not currently online. They are not part of what we call the internet. They aren't interacting. Their digital voices aren't heard. They don't have a digital voice. So it's not just that they can't access the information and all of the resources, healthcare, government resources, whatever else, access to job applications, all of that, but it's also that we lose because their voice is not part of that environment. But the third one is also really interesting, and this is one that I think we need to focus more on. Even if you have access, so even if you have the device, you can get online and you kind of have a sense of how to participate. Many people then don't have a sense of how that powers up their own opportunity to learn. So when you think about this opportunity to learn, that is what we want to expand. We want to expand that opportunity so people have many more choices. So the lack of powerful use is a problem. We see people, and the gap is that people who have access might use their technology for light communications. They might do a little bit of internet or whatever, but mostly it's for entertainment and kind of connecting up with people kind of in real time. What we see other people doing is kind of probably what everybody in this room does. You have your devices, you have access, you constantly can get online, you can look things up, you can answer that question, you can watch the videos, watch the TED Talks. It's constantly powering up our ability to think about things and to interact. see data visualizations, all those kinds of things. So the notion of leveraging technology for powerful use, for thinking critically, for solving complex problems, that's what we need to engage many more people in. So we need improve access to broadband through devices, et cetera. Mobile access, whether it's at school, in an office that you may go to in your workplace, whether it's at the library or community centers or wherever, we need to improve access. We also need to improve participation, and with our adult communities, but this starts at a young age, it's improving literacy, information literacy, media literacy. How do I interact in a media-rich environment online? And then, of course, it's digital citizenship. What are my rights and responsibilities? How do I think about privacy? How do I think about my own personal brand when I'm online, and those kinds of things? And then finally, it is this notion of powerful use, engaging people in much deeper learning experiences, going from kind of the light skimming across the surface, down deep, engaging people in solving complex problems, and doing things that, frankly, you could not do prior to having access to these tools in your own hands. Developing much better questioning strategies, research abilities, the ability to understand data and to be literate in the data literacy context. And then the opportunity and the ability to learn from these online courses and environments. I'm sure we'll talk more about this tonight. When you think about the massive open online courses, the MOOCs, the kinds of environments that are springing up, we are at a 1.0 right now. We are definitely at the very base, but now how can we begin to power up those environments, continuing to add features that are very user-centric, user-driven.
What do you mean by we're at 1.0?
Who said that?
Mitchell Stevens said that.
Who's got the microphone? What?
Just
what did God
a little more.
say?
When you say we're at 1.0, what do you mean?
So I think I think we'll talk about this more, but the mass, that was crazy. Ooh. You all know, obviously, you expected that. So the 1.0, I think it's basically saying that as you think about what's happened with the initial foray into providing these online courses, many of them are kind of the face-to-face course with some really interesting ways of maybe putting that stuff online. But there aren't, we don't have the Mayday button. I was talking earlier, the Amazon Kindle Fire, when it came out at Christmas time, had a button on it, the Mayday button. If you bought it, if you opened it under your Christmas tree, you could hit that button, that's the Mayday button. And I'm like, oh my gosh, everybody needs this. We need this for math, kids learning math, right? Everybody needs their Mayday button. I need help with this problem right now. And if we could start springing up these opportunities for people to get the assistance they need right now when they need it, I think, again, that there are so many things. Much better feedback loops. We need to break these courses down so our entire metrics for success aren't based on completion and credential. Instead, they're based on what are all the micro things that people are learning throughout the course, so we, again, don't have this kind of laser focus on, here's a course, must complete or fail. But we can talk more about that, and I'll be listening for more of those questions. So in a nutshell, we want to power up for lifelong learning. We want to help every single person of every age. And it's interesting in education right now because this is all ages. We have many adults who are not powered up. They don't understand the sense of their own digital future, their own digital learning capabilities, all the way down to young children. So this is definitely a lifelong learning. So with that, I will turn it over to Judy. Thank you.
Thank you. It is so fabulous to follow Karen, because didn't you just feel that great excitement about the promise of technology, the fact that we start with the assets as opposed to, what are we not doing? And I'm excited about being able to talk with you and provoke your thinking about how do we make sure that all those exciting technologies are available to everyone, and especially for populations that might be left on the margins because we don't think about how we develop our courses that we are hoping will indeed expand their access to education. So I'd like to talk a little bit about course success in both online and off campus, and I wanted to share this slide with you that shows you the figures for fall of 13 in the California community colleges. There are 112 of us. We serve 2.3 million students, and 643,000 were in online classes this year. So when we think about these numbers, of course what's going to immediately jump out to you is what you've probably already known about the achievement gap that has been there for Latinos and African Americans in on-campus courses. But you can see from this slide, it's an even deeper gap when you look at online. And this is not a unique phenomenon for California. Columbia University and their Community College Research Center had studied 23 Virginia community colleges, controlling for a wide array of student characteristics, and found that students who took online courses primarily in the beginning of their college careers were not likely to persist in college. If they took developmental mathematics or English, they were not likely to succeed in collegiate level courses subsequently. And if they took a higher proportion of online courses, they were less likely to be able to complete a certificate or transfer to a four-year institution. So this should raise a real set of concerns for us, right? So why are online course completion rates lower than what might be happening on campus? And some of the research does suggest it's not just due to the characteristics of the students, but the nature of the online experience itself. So I'd like us to ask ourselves that question. So what are the characteristics that might contribute to a lower set of completion rates? Well, we can certainly face technical difficulties. There are problems that are both unavoidable and system-based problems, as well as operator error, users' lack of familiarity with the systems that can often surface as frequent issues. And one study did conclude that the predominant reason for students dropping out of online classes is that they were encountering technical problems, there were computer-based learning issues, or other factors that were explicitly connected to the online nature of the course. Social distance emerges as an issue that for online students that were enrolled in 4 high-risk community college courses, they revealed a sense of isolation as the primary complaint of the students. They were just not feeling connected. And this lack of social interaction and presence in some online courses may be due to a lack of instructor time and training. Some instructors themselves will attribute their own social distance to not knowing how to do effective moderation strategies and having too little time. Additionally, some faculty have commented on the absence of the facial cues that would let them know how their students are actually responding to their own feedback. Lack of structure is certainly a function of most online courses being asynchronous, allowing students to access the material and do their learning at times convenient for themselves. But this freedom can lead to procrastination and a lack of progress. And some online students actually expressed dissatisfaction that the course was making them have to teach the material to themselves. And they struggled with that high degree of learner control that is so often typical of online courses. And a lack of student support is also a huge issue. Our online faculty are burdened with all of the non-instructional support requirements that in the on-campus classes will be spread through the institution with classified staff and other faculty. And so our online faculty are definitely not prepared to meet all the needs of tutoring and advising, financial aid, and even health services that online students might need. And additionally, students themselves may not have access to those resources that can help build competency in their own self-directed learning skills. So I lay this all out. So where do we go? What might we do about all this? Well, with technical difficulties, we certainly can't solve all the hardware and software problems, but we can be mindful of the limitations of devices and internet connections that are probably typical for students from underrepresented backgrounds and certainly from low-income populations. That if we're mindful about a design that could be readily there for the not-so-smartphones and, again, the lower speed broadband, that is going to be so important for the students to have a quality experience. For social distance, we certainly need to build a student sense of belonging and commitment. This can certainly be accomplished by encouraging relationships through communities of learning and otherwise helping students feel that the institution cares. That really is so important that we're able to convey that. And online courses do need to explicitly build social and emotional connections between students and instructors and also among students. And again, closing that social distance with various multimedia should take into account the issues of the devices and internet connections. Lack of structure should really lead us to make sure that we are not expecting our students to just automatically adapt to the online environment. For some students, the most important element of online instruction for them was instructor behavior with clear communication of expectations, requirements, due dates, and course activity instructions. Scaffolding uses activities and processes that explicitly teach metacognition, system knowledge, and self-efficacy. When you think about these skills, they really are essential for successful navigation of the online environment, but they're also foundational for all the work that students would do in the future. Universal design addresses the diverse skills, needs, and interests of learners by providing multiple means of representation, expression, and engagement. The avoidance of a one-size-fits-all in the online classroom could really make the difference between retention and attrition. And finally, on this slide, I wanted to share a comment about effective feedback, that it certainly needs to be concrete, specific, and useful. And it could bring a student full circle back to what we described earlier on for the clarity of the goals for that next set of instructions that they would need to follow. Lack of student support certainly could have us looking at the links on the websites for the on-campus services, since not everything will be available to them if they can't be physically present on the campus. And students are very likely to take advantage of support services if they are explicitly incorporated into the course syllabus. So if the instructor really makes it so clear what could be helpful, then they very much are likely to take advantage. Automated systems and contract services can certainly supplement the work of on-campus staff, particularly late at night when we don't have the offices open. And finally, online tutorials could certainly address topics such as time management and organization and stress management, and could be an excellent follow-up to any pre-assessment of student readiness for online instruction that may have been administered when students first went into those classrooms. I wanted to end with just a sense of hope and excitement about what is going on in the community colleges with a grand experiment to bring together all 112 in this ecosystem that would address needs of our students in all of our colleges in a way that we have never done before, and would dramatically increase the numbers of students who would be ready for the workforce and or transferring to four-year universities. I highlighted here those items that I mentioned earlier in my talk that are at the core of the kinds of issues that we are trying to address with the online education initiative. And again, this is so much about how will students be able to be successful as a function of our intentionality around the design of online education. And just ending with this slide, that we really need to take a big step that is so different from any ways we have approached these issues before, where we have siloed the challenges that might be in student services for online support services, or just various pieces that are in the instructional side of the house. Funding structures need to be looked at as well, and even how we measure success. That's going to be so important, because the students who come to the community colleges have a very wide array of reasons why they come to us. And so I would just like to end my comments by saying that we can use online learning to support student equity if we are intentional with our design. So I thank you, and I want to invite Eduardo up here.
Well, good afternoon. I'm glad to be here with my esteemed colleagues to give you a little bit different take on this question. We've looked at some of the fine-grained issues involved in the future of digital learning. I'm going to sort of zoom back out and look at some of the larger patterns. So let me start by talking a little bit about where we are in terms of the long view of this process. Teaching and learning, as you know, has not changed very much for millennia until relatively recently. We're about to go into a real inflection here. We have been doing it pretty much the same way for centuries, with faculty basically crafting their own courses, developing their own approach, and designing it each time de novo. We are now at the verge of a real transformation of teaching and learning because for the first time, we're beginning to understand scientifically how human learning takes place. We're understanding how the brain works and how cognition works. And this then creates the possibility for the kind of change in our industry. Let's think about it as an industry, as a line of endeavor, that has happened in other industries where also artisans where there was a transition from the artisan approach to one that was based on a scientific understanding of the principles underlying the production process to systematically engineering a more efficient way to produce. And so that's what we're at the verge of achieving now. And as we do this, like every technological revolution, it's going to create the possibility to increase the efficiency of the process by the time-tested way. The invariable way that this is done is by substituting capital for labor, by making the process itself less labor-intensive. So that's kind of the big picture of this process that we're on the verge of entering. And the question is, how is that going to actually work in the case of our industry? Who is going to be in the driver's seat of the process of technical change? So this is a little different twist on the whose digital future question. And I have a couple of cases to illustrate two different ways that things can go. And we're talking about an industry now. Let's talk about higher education for a minute, because that's my focus. We have universities, colleges and universities have been the traditional organization, institutional form that carries out this task. And as you know, if you look at why universities are configured the way they are, a lot of it flows out of the fact that in the past, information was very costly to gather and to disseminate. And we're about to enter a very different environment now. We have already in some ways. So if we are like the horse and buggy industry, we could try to fight a rearguard action against the changes and eventually get overrun by entirely new players. The alternative is to handle this the way architects have handled it as a profession when confronted with CAD technology that dramatically increased the productivity of many of the functions that architects carried out and also de-skilled those aspects of their profession. So rather than fight that automation, they embraced it. They shed those functions, those tasks, as part of their portfolio of activities, and they focused on the creative aspect of their profession. They reinvented themselves as creative artists, and admittedly, there are fewer architects working today. Many architects who used to have their bread and butter come from those activities that CAD has displaced are not there, but the ones who remain in the profession have a much richer and fulfilling set of tasks associated with their profession. So that's a situation, that I think in some ways is the hopeful path for university faculty and for universities as institutions. And thinking about institutions, we have a couple of dimensions to the institutional scenarios that we could face. One would be the disruptive innovation model. I'm sure you're familiar with Clay Christensen's analysis of that. When he analyzed other industries, he was very skeptical about the ability of industry leaders to actually change, to willingly give up what made them leaders, to embrace the new technology, so that it typically in industries where there is disruptive technical innovation, entirely new actors, new organizational forms develop that are built from the ground up around that new technology, and they gradually move their way up the value chain and eventually displace the leaders. So on the other hand, when Clay Christensen joined a university, suddenly he became more hopeful about the fact that maybe universities could be different and actually managed to get ahead of the curve. So he does have a book called The Innovative University, where he's trying to sketch out some ways that universities could be proactive about getting ahead of this change of technology, this disruptive technology, and survive as institutions. And another dimension of this, regardless of what institutional form prevails, is the question of whether the process of adopting the new technologies is going to follow a sort of a managerial paradigm or a professional control paradigm. Managerial paradigm would be more akin to Marx's analysis of the shift of the control of the production process from the worker to the owner. Where basically the demystifying of the artisan's skills and the systematic understanding of what was going on led to then very controlled, managerially controlled process where the skill is transferred from the individual to the machine, from labor to capital. The professional control model would be more along the lines of the architects that I mentioned, where you basically have a professional class that is able to take advantage of the technology to become more efficient, but at the same time maintain control of the process and maintain also the creative aspects to it. So those are a couple of dimensions that it remains to be seen how things are going to evolve. And I personally have obviously a stake in the universities being able to survive and thrive in this environment and survive in the midst of this technical change. I think it's important for us not only because of the core teaching function that universities provide, but because universities as institutions play a variety of other roles in their communities, and I think our societies would be seriously impoverished if the institutions that are able to bundle and cross-subsidize those activities fall by the wayside, and we get sort of an unbundling of those tasks. Looking at how this would impact the users or the consumers of education, we have a couple of stark, dystopian alternatives, and then possibly a middle path. So one possibility would be that the digital divide, we have a persistent digital divide. Well-endowed institutions like Stanford and others would provide a data-rich, technology-rich environment to provide an enriched learning experience to the students who are fortunate enough to attend it.
Even richer.
Yes. And the other alternative would be to actually use the technology to create fairly homogenized, capital-intensive, labor-saving, educational technology that is able to actually provide for mass education, kind of a McDonald's of higher education, for the larger numbers of people that need to be educated to operate in the global information economy. And the high-cost, labor-intensive learning experience then would continue in institutions, in the elite institutions. So the question is, this bifurcation, as Candace labeled it, can it be prevented? Or if it can't be prevented, can we at least ensure that in the sort of low-cost alternative, we still maintain or enhance quality? And I think that's the challenge. That's the challenge that we're facing. I'm personally optimistic as well. I think that there are many instances in the history of technology where you're able to make things cheaper and faster and better. And I think that some of the work that, in fact, the Open Learning Initiative has been engaging in can lead to the kind of unbundling of faculty functions that can concentrate the more scarce faculty contact time with the students in a more labor-saving mode that really focuses on the high quality, high touch, high quality, highly interactive aspects of education that students can benefit the most from that sort of manual approach, and then the things that are amenable to computerization, to automation, to use of artificial intelligence can be then offloaded from faculty time. And that way we could have faculty serve more students without them working harder and still deliver a quality education. That's what I'm hoping we'll be able to do in the state university system. We're hoping to collaborate with you all in exploring the possibilities for that kind of technology so we can serve more students, because California needs more college-educated students. The nation needs more college-educated students, and our current business model is not scalable to achieve that. So, thank you.
I'll start. Actually, when I was listening to Judy, I was thinking about how in K-12 education, schools, the public education system, and families kind of support their students with technology. And in many, probably all the students who go to Stanford have their own technology. But I think about community college students, and that is the one sort of slice where they actually need it desperately. But, so how do you manage that? Do you have any idea of what % of your students do not have access, their own personal access, and they count on the school, a lab, or the library or something to have that for them?
I think for those of us in Silicon Valley, we probably don't represent what is typical in the rest of the state. Mm-hmm. And it is amazing how many students do come to school with smartphones mm-hmm. and with tablets. But we are trying to do more of the readiness of our classrooms for mobile devices and looking at those kinds of strategies that could allow us to loan devices to students mm-hmm. so that they would be able to access more readily, because there is definitely that gap between the latest and greatest, and certainly the broadband access is a huge piece, and I was so grateful that you mentioned that in your talk as well.
So I have a question for either one of you or both of you, which is, I guess, given my background, I always sort of go towards the efficiency potential of mm-hmm. technology, but I find that that's not a very common perspective. In education, most people focus on, we can do things better, we can, enrich things. Are you aware of, do you think this is an issue? Are any of your faculty or instructional designers looking at those possibilities? What are the prospects for that kind of advance? Yeah,
so in the National Education Technology Plan that Candace and Roy P. both helped us with, and I don't know if there are any others in the room as well, but at least the two, there was a whole chapter on productivity. And it was really interesting when I started speaking publicly with, talking about the National Ed Tech Plan, and some people just railed against that term. And so I got inside of that term for 2 years and really took it apart and thought about it. And the productivity aspect has to do with doing the most useful, helpful, efficient, productive thing with every single student every single day. And so the productivity wasn't every child is a little robot and we're going to send them through the system, whether it's K-12, higher ed, community college, wherever they are. But it was much more about, it is a myth that you have third graders and they're all the same level, or you have a college class and they're sort of all the same level. And so how can you make sure that every single person has what is most productive and helpful for them every day? So that was one. And then the use of data is the other part of the productivity puzzle that's incredibly powerful. We have a ton to figure out, and privacy and use of data is really important to figure out. And it is the data that sort of is the rocket fuel of this productive innovation space.
And the online education initiative for the California community colleges is asking that very question. How do we get to those kinds of efficiencies and really bring together that incredible talent that our faculty and staff have? And where do we use the personal intersections as opposed to assuming that we always do what we've always done, the one-on-one and the one-on-5 or the one-on-10? Where can technology take us to have the kinds of tasks and even the diagnostics for students' readiness? I'm thinking about the project Ed.D through the National Repository of Online Courses, NROC. The incredible power of students being able to assess their own mathematics capability and the advice that can be given from Ed.D as to how students can remediate various gaps. There's a customization of there that we could never do if you were looking at meeting with counselors and mathematicians, and yet the power of putting that kind of tool in the hands of the students and then what we can do for them with some of that assessment, I think is just one small example of where the technology can take us in terms of scaling and customization.
So we have the most precious of commodities right now, which is physical co-presence of scores of people. So, and we've you guys have been great with time. So we have conditions for some really good open-ended discussion. In order to seed that, I'm gonna channel the voices of two people who are not on the panel. Okay, one was invited and wisely chose to not cancel his visit to his grandchild, and that's the historian Larry Cuban, who might say, I won't speak for him, but I'll channel the ghost of Larry Cuban, who would say, this actually isn't a new moment at all. This is the progressive era all over again, in which a new kind of industrial technology, a new kind of technology is promises to be the salvation of education if only we can apply the capacities that have been developed by capitalists elsewhere to schools. We can make them better, faster, more efficient, and we can produce more capable citizens. And that's how we got the age-graded, one-size-fits-all, formally bureaucratized school system that we now decry as hopelessly 20th, if not 19th century. So this is not a new story at all. This is a new kind of technology with a new kind of capital trying to imprint itself on schools and save us all from our Philistine pasts by bringing the gifts of their innovations forged in industry to save our schools. So why is it different? Why is it different than the progressive era industrialization of schools? And whether or not it's different, does the progressive era teach us anything about what might unfold in the next several years? That might be the Larry Cuban question. Okay. The person who was not
wait, that's
invited,
a big question.
right?
Maybe we should tackle that
and you don't
before you
have to
get the
answer
next
them.
one.
I'm just throwing them out there. The person who was not invited on purpose because Candace and I wanted to focus on the public goods aspect of this moment is, who's going to pay for all of this? Last I checked, Sacramento and Washington, don't have claim they don't have the capital that it's going to take to reorganize education around a digital future. So, why aren't we talking about money here? Okay.
Can I take
Where
a
do we
crack
start
at it?
with that? Go ahead. You take Larry Cuban.
Okay. The first question, I mean, I think that, that question tends to conflate two things, which is, one is the the control structure, the organizational structure that manages the technical change from the technology itself. And if you continue to apply sort of the corporate managerial model, as I mentioned earlier, you're going to get a certain kind of technical change, or at least a certain kind of organization around the new technology. But if you put that aside for a minute and look at the actual technology, there is a qualitative difference between information technology and the technology of the Industrial Revolution, which was mechanical. It was based on division of labor, on systematically breaking down tasks, repetitive tasks, into smaller and smaller and simpler pieces, and then mechanizing them. Whereas what you have now is a technology that is multi-purpose, that it can process information, gather it and process it at astonishing speeds, that completely changes the physical foundation for everything that we do. And so it has the potential to empower individuals in a way that other technology, the other mechanical approach didn't. But it does make a difference who's in control of the process. If you have a corporate structure driving this, you're going to find that the technology is going to be slanted, the technology is going to be used towards some variant of that sort of hierarchical top-down sort of approach. But that's not the only possible future with this technology.
I'd like to expand on that too, that I think what's different about the technologies now, unlike other technologies that would function within the existing structures, if you look what happened to the music industry, to the publishing industry as a result of our being able to be online, we no longer have to work through those structures, so somebody can just go ahead and go online, be a designer, producer, distributor of a product. And I think education is moving into that when you look at the extra institutional efforts that are there, and not just limited to the MOOCs, but the accessibility that we have to learning being defined in very different ways. It's no longer just a matter of the content being controlled by those who have already controlled it. And so I think that's where the internet is truly the game changer, unlike any of the other changes that might have occurred previously that had that physical boundary that is now not the limiting factor, either by way of time or place.
And I would just add that so yes and completely. And the other interesting part of this is that I think it's better comparison to the printing press, right? So you used to be able to learn from people. You always could learn from people, the people around you. Printing press comes out, and now, if you can learn to read, you can now learn from books, right? So now people can read, they can share books, you can distribute knowledge across geographies because now you can share it in a written format. And now the internet is much like that. We now have an entirely new distribution and capacity to share knowledge across geographies in an unbelievably sort of rapid manner, and we're not just limited to text. We have all sorts of other kinds of media to include on that. So it's interesting. The money, I don't know. We could talk about funding for a long time here. I think if you put it in a global context, we have a lot of money that pays for education in the United States. Here at Stanford, it's an unbelievable amount of money. In the local school districts, again, comparatively, there's thousands of dollars every year are spent on children and their education. There doesn't feel like there is ever enough, but I think that as we think about budgets, and we've done these exercises with superintendents with zero-based budgeting, like starting fresh, like saying, okay, today, the very basics of what you need, and you start layering it up and you start over again. There actually is money. There's a lot of legacy money that we're spending. Money we're spending on legacy things that we can rethink. But I think that as soon as we adopt the idea that digital opportunities, digital learning is just incredibly core and central to the opportunity to learn today, and we start there, then we kind of build around it. Then there actually is plenty of money in the United States to fund digital learning environments. There was just 750 million, maybe more than that corporations donated or have put forward as contributions for technologies. Just an amazing amount of money, just kind of somebody asked them to as part of the Connect Ed program. So there's money.
And I think the money is money is actually not that big of an issue because, particularly if we focus on the productivity enhancing aspect, payoffs from this, the payoff cycle is really not very long at all. Considering that if you are able to do things more efficiently.
I know the community college funding model best because I had also worked in Sacramento and worked with the legislature. We don't fund the right things. We basically pay colleges for having students sitting in seats with appropriately certified faculty members. We don't fund for the behaviors that will lead to student success. We don't fund for the classified support staff that are absolutely essential for students being successful, because we have to really work with our students in a much more holistic way than selective admissions institutions might do that. And so there are all those dollars out there. Dollars get siphoned off into categorical programs, into grants where we have to compete for those dollars. And so we spend our own energies and efforts trying to get at the dollars that would be so much better spent on direct services to students or better wages for our faculty and staff. So I just think it's just so wrongly organized in terms of how we express our values, and so much is really around regulation and compliance and audit findings.
Wow, okay. So your turn. When you raise your hand, we'll acknowledge you and stand up and introduce yourselves when you make your comment or ask your question.
Hi, my name is Namita Gupta. I'm a professor at a university in Bangalore in India. I wanted to follow up on the Larry Cuban question. So I'm a bit uncomfortable with this idea of technology empowering students and that kind of bringing them at the same plane, because my experience, and it's from a different cultural context, is that there are social class divides amongst students who feel empowered enough to access technology in certain manners to further their learning, and students who wait to be told on what they can do and what they cannot do. And therefore, I'm almost afraid that it's kind of putting a weapon in someone who already is powerful, and that kind of widens divides instead of, you're not giving the power in the hands of a student who can feel empowered because socially and culturally they don't think that they're empowered. And I unfortunately don't see technology bridging that so far.
Right, the technology is not going to close that, but speaking in the U.S., and you can say whether it's going to happen in other places, public education can address that. So it's public education is the place where we should be powering up each person's feeling of agency and the abilities they have to be a learner themselves. And so in the U.S., we think about public education as the place where we can hopefully close that divide and help all students, regardless of what their home socioeconomic status is, home background is, that they can feel like they can learn.
And if I could just add to that, I think the question is, your point is, and question is very valid, and so is your response. But actually, when I said empowering individuals, not empowering students, I was actually thinking of faculty vis-a-vis administration, because in universities like mine and community colleges, the relationship between faculty and administration is not quite the one you have in a research university, where the faculty have much more discretionary power. But in those universities, and certainly in new actors, entirely new actors, and for-profit institutions, you would basically have a managerial approach to the kind of change, an adoption of this technology. And so I was contrasting. I was saying that's not the only way we can go. We can also go with one where faculty, like the architects, are in charge of the redesign of the teaching and learning process.
I think Joseph was next. And then I see the hand down here.
Hi, I'm Joseph Williams. I'm a postdoctoral research fellow here in online learning. Thanks a lot for such an insightful presentation. It was really thought-provoking way to end the series. One thing I was wondering is whether we might be able to address some of the challenges and engage with these opportunities by focusing a bit more in a modular way. So instead of focusing on course development, which is kind of the dominant paradigm, what if we're focusing more on like bite-sized modules, like lessons or quizzes? So instead of all the talk about MOOCs, what if you think of something like a MOOClet, where you have a standalone resource? And you know, what does that mean? Is that what are the pros and cons of that? And what would be the implications? Does that mean that we should be formulating instructional design principles or intentional design for a lesson or a quiz instead of an entire course? Or should we be favoring platforms or technology that makes it really easy for anyone to quickly order something and then change it quickly? Does assessment of whether it's a good course or not, is that the wrong question? It should actually be assessment of this was a good lesson, that was a good quiz.
Yeah.
So I'd be curious, and what's the closest thing to that that's happening now?
I guess what I would want to say is that I wouldn't want to just limit the discussion about how we move forward on behalf of our students just to course design. I think it does require a very holistic approach in a very dramatically different way than we have typically done. I think that there are typical silos of instruction and student services and administration and obviously within the disciplines. And I think the challenge is how do we bring all of those pieces together in service to our students and cross those divisions of the way we have divided up work within the institution. And I think that's a huge challenge. I do think technology can help us manage that process and become one of the tools that we use in that kind of reach, because it affords us a capacity that we would not be able to do just as human beings by ourselves in terms of the kind of reach. So I guess I would back away from saying drill down in a more granular way to actually thinking about the way Eduardo had talked to us about the big picture.
So I would also just add a yes and that love the idea of MOOClets. And I think that, you know, so here's a specific example. I was working with a young woman recently who she needed to take a math class, and she needed to take 2 math classes before that college math class. So as a community college student, needed to get into a math class. There were 2 prerequisites. Neither one of them would give her credit, but she needed to learn the stuff in them. And she really didn't want to take the time or spend the money because she knew she had like a scattered need. She didn't need the whole course. She needed some pieces and parts. So we were doing a little research to find out if you could find out what was on the placement test. If you actually knew what was required, then she would access those MOOClets. She would figure out what are those pieces that I need. Now, this is a little different than becoming a mathematician and thinking holistically. So I am glossing over the fact that there are lots of parts of mathematics that have to do with the things in a great context and solving complex problems and those kinds of things. In this case, though, this particular young person would benefit greatly from having access to lots of different opportunities to learn these specific mathematics skills so that she could get into this course. The other thing that I would say is that if you picture a triangle, and at the top of the triangle is the description of what you need to know and be able to do. So say it's to be an accountant or an engineer or a machine learning programmer or mathematician or whatever. If you can articulate those things, what it's been is a closed system. So you have what you need to learn, how you learn it, and the assessment of that learning was a closed system. You take a class, the teacher tells you what you're going to learn, they teach it to you, and they assess you. What we can actually do now is decouple those things. So if we can articulate broadly to everybody what you need to know and be able to do for a whole variety of ways, you can take MOOCs, MOOClets, online courses, pay for courses, hire a tutor, hire a mentor, watch videos, lots of different ways of learning now, read books, join communities of practice, lots of ways of learning. And then the third corner has to do with assessment. And that's where we're actually doing some interesting work thinking about how you could assess micro-credentials based on performance. And so I think that there are some very interesting things, and just in its infancy, and thinking about the ways that people could, if they knew what they need to learn, they go learn it. When they're ready, they come over here and they say, now I'm ready. Can somebody, watch me discuss? Almost, you could, everything from like defending a dissertation type of an interaction to taking a quick test, demonstrating performance, uploading a video, whatever the kinds of things are that would be the demonstration. So I think there's a crazy amount of innovation that can happen in exactly in the space of your question.
My name is Bob Martinez, and for 14 years or so I worked at Cisco Systems and worked on the certification programs and technical training, and our students were people all over the world trying to learn how to get good jobs in the technical field. My question is with the idea of digital media, and of course, I'm assuming that we still keep books, we still keep instructors. Yep. It's all the above that we're really looking at. But there's a tendency, I think, sometimes to teach to the test. And the idea is that if you pass the test, you're not necessarily able to demonstrate the skills that the employer who gave the $750 million or whatever it is really wants to have. So when they hire the person, they can say that this digital or whatever it is experience is a good predictor that they'll be good employees. So there's a big gap, I think, between what industry all over the world wants and the skills that and the value of the skills that we're able to show with this. So how do you see that gap closing with this 2.0 that we're heading towards?
Well, I think that what you're pointing to is really what's been the driver for the move toward learning outcomes and assessment of learning outcomes, as opposed to focusing on content and tests. But I have to say that from industry we do get mixed messages. When you hear CEOs talk, it's we want people who be good critical thinkers, team players, multiculturally competent, blah blah blah, all these soft skills. The liberal arts people get really excited about that, but then when the recruiters come on campus, you get a different story. So somehow there's a little bit of a communication gap within the corporate hierarchy itself. Yeah.
Hello, are you ready for my next question? Hello, my name is Luke Ekizaglu, and I'm an electrical engineer in the private sector here in the Bay Area. And during my education, I found that interaction with people was the most important thing and probably allowed me to continue on when times were really tough. And that includes Caltech and Stanford, both. Yes, in school. And this interaction with people basically was sitting around doing homework. And I'm wondering, how do you guys envision the digital future in helping continue that or provide that kind of service to students?
Well, I think that issue of social distance has been a real challenge, and that has caused students to drop out of online experiences. I do think that as we look at a generation of learners that are much more comfortable with the virtual world than would be my generation and earlier, that there are ways that I think we really can create true community online. I don't think it will ever totally substitute for those special moments that really come. I think as human beings, there just will always be that need for the high touch aspect of this. And I think as we look at what the digital world can bring to us, it's just, again, more opportunities and more choices for people who will find that will increase some access for them that they might not have otherwise had.
I thought it was really interesting when you're talking about social distance, because I think about all of the connections that people have online now, and I think of the internet and the ability to interconnect with people as incredibly powerful. And so I started thinking about this whole notion of the divide and the gap between people who know how to interact with people socially online to the benefit of their learning, or even just hanging out together, learning, working on their homework together or whatever, and people who may not. I spend more time with school age kids, younger kids, but they hang out online from their homes with each other. So they will have a hangout with 3 or 4 of their friends, and they're doing their homework, and they're also talking to each other. It doesn't replace going to the library and hanging out together there or getting together at each other's houses, but it sort of expands the amount of time that's kind of available to them. So it's kind of interesting. But I think that for the online courses, and Candace actually, I think you articulated it better than I've heard anybody articulate this, is when students take, sometimes when somebody comes online and enters into a MOOC, for example. And one of the things that we know that's going to be incredibly important to them is to have a place to go connect with other people. And this MOOC has no prerequisite, but it's a Stanford MOOC. And so actually there is a prerequisite. The prerequisite is that you got into Stanford, right? So there you have to sort of be at a certain level before you actually, the person entering this doesn't know this. And so when they go in and start hanging out with other people taking this course, they actually could get very quickly like shut down, disenfranchised, like, yeah, this is not for me. This isn't my, these aren't my people. This isn't my language. I don't know how to actually work within this. So I think that if we have an idea that online courses and online spaces can actually power up the opportunity to learn, we need to really get in and identify and start teaching people how to get into groupings, because we do know that that social aspect of learning is incredibly important.
I'm just going to chime in here on, I think what Luke's point is going to become an ever hotter flashpoint in this discussion, because there are several things we know about physical co-presence. One, it's an ancient and effective technology for learning, right? I mean, brought to you by Socrates, okay? We also know there's very good evidence, and I'm plugging a book called How College Works by some sociologists, Chambliss and Takas. But the big takeaway finding from this study, it's a real stunner. Are you ready for this? Like, the big predictors of satisfaction in college years after graduation are, one, did a faculty member take a personal interest in me at some point while I was in college? Specifically around writing, it turns out. But did someone sit down with my work personally and help me with it? And two, did I have 1 to 3 really good friends in college, right? That is those are the two biggest predictors of adult reported satisfaction with their college experience. So the question is not, is physical co-presence an important part of education? There's no question it is. We are at, and one of the things we've been talking about in EDF for the last year is, we are in a moment where if we think about co-presence as a treatment, how can we dose it more efficiently, right? So we're not replacing co-presence with other kinds of community, but if the simple fact of co-presence is the biggest cost center in schooling, you know, how do we parse that and distribute it in ways that are more effective than we currently do?
Yeah, I would, restate that in the following way. If you kept a log of a faculty member's activity, particularly in a teaching institution, over their work week, what percentage of that time is spent on the kind of high quality interaction with students that, pretty low. So the idea is to really focus that time on that and unbundle the other things and outsource them and so on. Yeah.
Hi, Eric Taylor. I'm a student here at Stanford in the Graduate School of Education. And Eduardo, you talked about capital replacing labor, and that can happen at sort of a very extensive margin. There might be fewer faculty, but it can also happen within the job description of a particular faculty member. They're doing different things. They're spending more of their time on a smaller number of things, or maybe there are newer things they're doing. So I'm just sort of wondering, for the both of you as employers of faculty, are you already thinking or acting differently on how you think about the faculty that you employ, hiring and firing, evaluating and training? Is that already making changes in what you do day to day on that dimension, or do you see that as something that's further down the road?
Well, I started out as a faculty member. I still think of myself as an academic, and I think that, and I do believe in, the way we are organized is long term, and for a variety of reasons, and in terms of many other values that we bring to the community. I want to preserve that kind of shared governance structure and the role that faculty have. So I'm not interested in proletarianizing our faculty, but I am sort of gently nudging the faculty and particularly the new incoming faculty into becoming more sensitive to the issue of looking for ways to do what we do more efficiently. And I've sort of pitched them this idea that this technology has the potential to raise our productivity, and I want to get them comfortable with the notion of increasing productivity. And I'm trying to educate them about the fact that higher productivity doesn't mean just speed up. It doesn't mean working harder. It means actually, qualitatively changing how we do things so we actually can serve more students with the same number of faculty. And I point out, and I do admit to them, that when you replace labor with capital, if you keep the output constant, you're going to actually eliminate jobs. But that's happily not the situation we're in. We need all the faculty we can get. We need to raise the capacity of our educational system so we can serve more students. So this is actually, we're at kind of a sweet spot in terms of introducing technical productivity, improving technical innovation, because we can use it all to increase the capacity that we need. Right now, the big challenge is the fact that the president's 2020 education goal means capacity has to go that way, and what's been happening to state investment in higher education means our capacity has been going that way. So technology can help, close that gap.
I think the most important thing I do is to hire faculty. And even though full-time faculty are more expensive than would be a comparable number of part-time faculty, I am always trying to wrangle more full-time positions out of our board because I feel so strongly about the capacity for full-time faculty to engage with students, to develop curriculum, and I really value those faculty who come to us with a clear track record of putting students at the center of their work and really showing a very deep commitment to student learning. And they come in all shapes and sizes and all different kinds of personalities, but to me it's about what they will be able to do for students. And I do think it's just so important that when I consider the fundraising that I would do, so what are the additional resources that I need to bring to the campus, one of my highest priorities is how do I buy faculty time? Because we have such a huge teaching load. Our faculty teach anywhere from, we're on the quarter system, but they'll teach 8 to 11 courses in a year. I mean, that's huge, and these aren't, all the same preparations. Our students are so varied in, so when you think about just the teaching load for our faculty, and so I figure that my faculty are really alchemists. They definitely take lead and turn it into gold with, I mean, they're just, there's so few resources that they're given, and that would be what I would love to be able to do, to give them that space for that creativity, which really serves the students so well when they can be there, and that they can have time with their students and indeed be engaged in all that and not just worried about, again, all the administrivia that we often saddle them with.
I'm Paulo Blickstein. I'm a professor here at the Graduate School of Education. So I just wanted to ask each of you, like, what is the thing you're most afraid of? I mean, we are talking about all these like optimistic futures, but let's say if things go wrong, how would the worst case scenario look like?
I haven't heard this much optimism in public institutions in California since the end of the Cold War.
I mean, there are so many things that can go wrong. I mean, that's a very good question. I would say so I'm not going to entirely answer it, but I would say that there are some very thorny issues to really figure out, privacy being one of them. Figuring out how we can leverage the best possible understanding of data and what it means to be a learner, and connect it with learning sciences and connect it with health sciences and other kinds of things without losing whatever semblance of privacy we have left. So I think privacy is definitely one of the things that we have to be incredibly careful about. The other thing that I worry a lot about, is I pass by playgrounds or, even see people in cars and everyone's, the adults is like pushing the kid on the swing and going like this and looking at their phone at the same time, or the kid in the car is just looking at a device. I worry a lot about ambient things going on and observations about the world and nature and just kind of things around us. And those are the things I think about, that, with any technology, with anything, what is amplified and what is reduced. And I think there are some things being reduced right now that we have to pay particular attention to and figure out how to manage. We're going to be working with some middle schools, and the students will have tablets and data plans so they can use them out of school and in school. And I see a very big part of our job is going to be parent and family interaction. I don't even call it education, just interaction. Like, how do we work with parents and families and understand what the best possible strategies are for managing technology at home? so that you don't lose that sense of togetherness and familyness, because everyone's just kind of scattered into their own worlds, including the adults. So those are things I worry about. I don't know if that's the worst possible scenario, but sure could be worse.
Well, I think I outlined several dismal scenarios in my slides, but I guess the one way to describe most of them is the commoditization of higher education. That's what I worry about. That this technology will be used with a certain social logic instead of a better one.
Well, I worry that I'm wrong in my optimism. I guess, in all seriousness, what I think would be the worst possible scenario would be populations being left behind. I think about, those populations that are currently homeless and hungry, and that education really will be the pathway for them and their families and their communities. And it's such a complex problem, and that in such a community of wealth, there are so many populations that are forgotten. And so I would just worry that we're really not going to use all of the wealth and all of the talent to tackle some of the most complex problems. So that, to me, would be the worst scenario.
Hi, I'm Megan Petrie. I work at SCPD. And my question, I guess sorry. My question is, before I worked here, I worked in a public school in North Carolina that was drastically underfunded. And so I now have worked with two very different populations. And my mom is a professor at a community college, so I kind of run the whole gamut. And I was actually on the phone with her on my way here, and she was like, "Oh my God, I'm going to teach online." And I'm like, "That's great, Mom. What are you going to do?" And she's like, "Well, the president of our college told us that we all need to make videos and put them online because we're all going to be flipped." And I was like, I really think that we need to have a bigger conversation about all of those things that you just said. But the thing that really got me thinking, and then all of you talking about these different populations, is what I've noticed is there is no one-size-fits-all anything for education ever. And I worry that one of the things that could happen with technology is every time a bright, shiny new toy comes out, every teacher, every professor, every faculty member thinks it's, this thing that they have to do. Like, I had 16-year-old freshmen who couldn't read. But if I had an iPad, I could fix them. But no, I can't, because there are so many bigger problems. And I'm just wondering if there's any research or initiative to work on being able to say, this is what can help this population with this problem, which is different than this population with this problem. And I was wondering if any of you knew if any of that work was being done.
Sure, there's a lot of work being done. There was a lot in that. There was a lot you just said, not the least of which is I'm thinking, man, when I talk to my kids, I can be sure they're not going to speak publicly soon right after that. No, but so I think absolutely. And I think, the kind of silly way we talk about it is we say, let's talk about the verbs, not the nouns, right? So let's talk about the learning and what we want to have happen and what we see the actions being, not the shiny objects. So definitely people have to make a concerted effort to not think of shiny objects. I think that in terms of population, I think of individuals. So I think the best example is students with special needs or people with special needs, and that's like 30% of the population. It's not like a small, set of people. And so when we think about the technologies that support those students in whatever it is they need, there are so many different things that are interesting. So I'll give you a couple examples. So for example, that some people can see white text on a black background much better than black text on a white background, which is what is normal. Well, guess what? I actually really like that too. When we go to sleep at night and my husband's reading, I'm like, black on white, or white on black, like flip it. So those kinds of technologies, the kinds of things that are being designed and developed are actually good for lots of individuals. If you take the text on a screen that can read to you, So if you have a student that can't read, you know, the text on a screen that can read to you was actually designed for people who are blind. But guess what? It's incredibly helpful if you're a medical student and you're reading new material, if you're learning English, if you just want a word read to you, if you're learning to read that can, you know, highlight the words and you can follow along. There are so many kinds of technologies that are being designed and developed that you wouldn't just say, hey, everybody, use this now. But it is it's an accessible accommodation that is really helpful. It was designed for one population, but very, very helpful for lots of other learners and people as well.
Hi, I'm Kim, and I'm with the Open Learning Initiative at Stanford. And I have a question, which I don't hear a lot about in these forums, is what do you think about the profit colleges like University of Phoenix? And it seems like when you talk about targeting low-income students or students who have financial aid, they've done a really good job at marketing and getting those folks in and taking their money and kind of, it seems my perception is it often leaves them in debt and not necessarily with a degree always. I don't know what the research is on that. Okay, thank you. But I'm curious what your thoughts are on how you guys feel like, let me just find out what your thoughts are and how you're thinking of dealing with that for it.
Put them all in one category because I think there is such a wide array of integrity that's represented there. I think some for-profits do a really fine job, and it's really unfortunate that at the other end of the spectrum you have ones that really are just unethical, and I think that's really a shame. So for me it's hard to respond to it as a total sector and not take into account individual differences.
So when I was assistant secretary for post-secondary education, we were, I was involved in drafting the gainful employment rules that were fought bitterly by the for-profit schools.
Do you know
and
what the gainful employment rules are? Yeah, say a little bit about
okay,
that.
gainful. The Obama administration decided to go after the abuse that they saw in the financial FSA, federal student aid program, and they basically took one line from the Education Act that mentioned professional programs that are designed to lead to gainful employment. As you know, they read that line and said, okay, Congress didn't specify how that's to be defined, so that gives the administration leeway to actually draft rules that would define whether something leads to gainful employment or not. And so that out of that came the whole set of regulations that were designed to curb abuses in the federal student aid program, because in fact the for-profit sector has a very, very disproportionate share of the student loan program, and their graduation rates as a group tend to be quite low. Now they argued that this was because they were serving a segment of the population that the traditional colleges, nonprofit colleges and public colleges basically ignored. But the analysis that we did in the department showed that even when you take into account the different demographic profile of the students that they were going after, it still was, not a very good performance. Also, even some of the best, for-profit organizations, they basically are for-profit corporations. And University of Phoenix is an example. I mean, they, when you talk to their top executives, they certainly have, they espouse, the right values and so on. But when it comes down to the level of the individual recruiter down in the trenches, and you look at their incentive compensation structure, it creates, pressure to make the sale, to close the sale with students. And so you get that kind of high pressure environment with a not well informed public, which is the segment of the market that they're going after. and even then, or you'll have actual abuses. So, I mean, Senator Harkin did a whole series of hearings about this, and there's a lot there if you go digging to show that. So that's a problematic sector, and I think that, you know, as an economist, the way I look at this is, this is a case of a market where there is asymmetric information between buyer and seller. You've got, you know, and that's the typical situation when you're selling a product that a consumer is not very well informed about. That's where regulation is meant to compensate for that. So the idea that this could be a free market, I mean, I really find that very, you know, not plausible. So unfortunately, the regulations have been tossed out by the court, and they're going back to the drawing board, and they're doing a new set of negotiated rulemaking. So we don't know where that's going to end up. But
it kind of comes full circle to your comments about pay for performance, or you know, is there a way of somehow incentivizing? I mean, what happens is kids get their loan, they give it to the school. The school's like, thanks. And the incentive is not there to help them actually succeed and get through. So that's where the problem is, and then the loan is with them for life, and lots of issues ensue. But if you know, so there was a lot of conversation also about could you actually create a system whereby the school actually gets paid when the student succeeds, and then they get paid for the, I mean, you flip that incentive, and their incentive then is to get paid when the student is successfully completes. That would just change everything. Not going to happen in
the problem
short
is,
term.
you know, how do you define success? Is it graduation?
Yeah, right.
I mean, it's very easy to issue degrees. So is it employment? Yeah. That could be one. But how far out? 1 year out, 3 years out, 5 years out? It's complicated.
It is complicated.
Ladies and gentlemen, is what you call a community of discourse. And just because education's digital future is concluding does not mean you've seen the end of us. If we have your name on a mailing list, you will hear from us again. You'll have multiple opportunities to continue this conversation here in this room and in other physical facilities across Stanford. We will continue to support the web presence for several months at least, and we won't drop the ball, especially if you keep paying attention. If you could help me in thanking this spectacular panel.
Well done. Very